Dianne has a certain voice, a certain approach to this as June 23rd is here. Dianne, what have you changed in your campaign over the last number of days? What is your new message as you go to the middle of June?
I guess my new message, which isn't really particularly new at all, is that this campaign is actually intended to make sure that our city comes back in a way that we've never existed before, in a way that recognizes our collective interdependence, and in a way that makes it possible for every New Yorker to live in dignity. We haven't quite lived up to the idea of being the greatest city in the world, and this is our moment to seize that opportunity.
We've heard this from other candidates. Frankly, we've seen polarizing candidates and those looking for us out of the pandemic to come together. How do you link that with the budget realities of New York City?
Well, I think the budget realities are that while we won't look like we did in 2019, we're still the wealthiest city in the country, if not the world. And there is enough to go around. And that we've seen throughout the course of the pandemic, from a message of unity, we've seen who it was that kept the city operating. We've seen who it was that made it possible for so many of us to work comfortably from home. And the reality of it is that those are the folks who are also right now the most vulnerable and have been the least protected. And it's a both and situation. We can actually, make it possible for them to continue in their roles that make it possible for the rest of us to exist, and make it possible for them to live in dignity.
Which raises a question about paying for proposals that will allow people to live in dignity of all income spheres. And the idea here is also that New York City is already a pretty high tax region, and there already has been discussions of ultra high net worth individuals moving to Florida, moving to Arizona, lower tax states. What's the tipping point in your mind for how high tax rates can go before you get this exodus that becomes counterproductive to the overall revenue of the city?
So I guess the first pushback I'll give on that question, or the framing of that question, is the idea of this exodus. I don't think that the numbers actually bear that out to be true. We've seen that in the course of the last 12, 15 months, Wall Street has done just great. We've created more millionaires and more billionaires. And actually, the real estate market is on an uptick here in New York City. So I don't think those indicators actually support the idea of a mass exodus. I also think that there's a lot that we can do with what we have. When we look at the resources of the city budget, I think there's a lot of reallocation and reinvestment that we could be doing with the dollars that we do have before we even engage in a conversation about generating additional resources. But I do think that it's also important for us to have that conversation. I think it is fair to ask people to pay their fair share. While we might say that our tax rates are higher than other places in the country, we also have the greatest concentration of mass wealth. So those two things are actually should go hand in hand. And the idea of comparing us to other cities kind of doesn't make sense given the inordinate wealth that we have here to begin with.
Another aspect that a number of mayoral candidates have pointed to that is important to keep businesses here is crime and keeping crime down. A number of people have talked for more police, having a task force perhaps in the subway. What's your view on the best way to bring down crime that has been taking up over the past 14 months?
Sure. I mean, I think that the best way to do that is to recognize the link between the increase in crime rate and the increase in insecurity that New Yorkers have experienced throughout the course of the pandemic. We've allowed for housing insecurity to persist. Food insecurity has only grown. We haven't provided health care in the middle of a global pandemic. So, people's individual lives have gotten increasingly insecure. And I think that correlates directly to the increase in violence as people try to figure out how to survive and how to make it in the city. So I think that the first thing that we need to do is to actually make sure that we're providing people with the access to the resources and supports that they need so that they can actually live safely at home.